a modified version of DECT CLE to verify that. And this worked, well, quite great. So after this was complete, we had the structure of the DECT standard cipher. We had a complete description of the DECT standard cipher, and this is how the cipher looks like. We have these 4 registers. We have these feedback polynomials. The gray bits of the registers are used for the clocking control unit. So, for example, the clocking of register R1 depends on this bit, and one of these bits. I'm not so sure. I think it was 0 or 2. These linear feedback shift registers aren't coupled in any way, so each of them runs quite independently except for the clocking. And the last 2 bits of the registers are used to generate the output of R1 to R3. So the output of the cipher is a function depending on the last bit of output and of 2 bits of the registers R1, R2 and R3. And this function here looks like cryptographic S-box. So it's highly nonlinear and well, it doesn't have much structure, at least no structure we could easily spot. And it has some very useful and good properties. It's balanced, for example. So it has 64 different inputs, and 32 of these inputs result to 0, and 32 of these inputs result to 1, which is a very good property for such a cipher.
Oh, yeah, crypto stuff. I like crypto stuff. One thing I want to point out on this slide, just very high level. Here's an organization that invented A51 in cell phones and intentionally kept it limited in its capabilities so they could export it, Cold War and all that. Cold War is over, and they are asked to build a new cipher. It appears to us, of course, I don't really know the story behind it, it appears to us as if they took the A51 design and made it better in every cryptographic dimension imaginable. So they take more of the same and add things around it that all make it strictly more secure from what we understand. They released this as a cryptographic algorithm that they now think is secure, hand it over to the engineers who have to implement it, who decide to make it just a little bit faster. And you see the bold numbers here indicate which of the ciphers is stronger. And DSC is weaker only in this very last dimension here, where the engineers thought they could save a little time. This very one tweak makes the DSC cipher strictly weaker than A51. And this is just a major crypto fuck up if this was not meant to be as weak as it is. So here's I was saying earlier that there's 2 lessons to be learned from DECT, really, that you shouldn't keep your proprietary crypto proprietary, but rather open it to the public to review before you put it in devices. And you should make clear that you have best practice people implementing it and talking about how to best implement it. Well, this is an example of where both went wrong. The cipher was kept secret, and then the implementation of it made it all the worse. Right? So, beautiful example of how not to design cryptography. But again, this is 20 years ago, and hopefully nobody's doing this anymore, of course.
So I think many of you have ever tried to open a bag of potato chips, and when you if you're not able to open the bag, then you look for a please break here or please open here sign on the package. And as a cryptographer, when you look at the DECT standard cipher, then this description of the cipher looks like a please break here sign to a cryptographer. So we started looking at the cipher, and when you look at the DECT standard cipher, or you look at the A51 cipher, or you look at a similar stream cipher, then you see that all these cipher are irregularly clocked, which means that you have some registers here which are somehow combined to an output, and the number of clocks depends on the state of the registers. So every time a bit of output is produced, this register here is clocked 2 or 3 times, and for A51 it would be clocked 0 or 1 times. This is called irregular clocking. And if you would take such a design and remove the irregular clocking, and just take the A51 cipher or take the DECT standard cipher, and I make it regularly clocked, which means that every time, for every bit of output, every register is clocked exactly 1 time. Or, for example, 2 times or 3 times, it doesn't matter. If it's regularly clocked, then the cipher is incredibly weak. And if we assume for a moment that this cipher is regularly clocked, then we can easily break the cipher. The output of the cipher depends on 6 bits of the internal state of the DECT standard cipher. And if the cipher would be regularly clocked, then the knowledge of one of these bits, for example this bit here, then would allow you to cut the key space down by half. So if you can determine the internal state of this bit, then you just have to search through half of the key space when attacking the cipher, and you can repeat that. So for the DECT standard cipher, if you would see 1 bit of output here, then you could then you have 64 possible values of these 6 bits here. So there are 6 bits which produce this bit of output, and these 6 bits can have 64 different values in total. So they could be all set to 0, or they could be all set to 0 except the last bit, which could be set to 1, or they could be all set to 0 except the second last bit, which could be set to 1. And there are 64 possible values of these bits, but only half of them would produce the bit of output you see here. So if you see a bit of output, then you can restrict the possible values of these 6 bits down to half. So there are only 32 possible values for these 6 bits if you see the output 1, for example. And you can just iterate over that and restrict the key space to 2 to 63 possible keys, or 2 to 62 possible keys, or 2 to 61 possible keys, because the internal state of the cipher is always just a linear combination of the initialization vector and the key. And using that, you could, with perhaps 32 bits of output, break the cipher completely within minutes on a PC. However, the cipher is irregularly clocked, so you cannot run the attack on the cipher, because you don't know when the first bit of output is produced by the cipher, you don't know how often this register has been clocked, because there are 40 blank rounds, and during each blank round the register could be clocked 2 or 3 times. You know that the register has been clocked at minimum of has been clocked at least 80 times, and you know that the register has been clocked at most 120 times, but you don't know how much exactly, so you can run the attack. If you would know it, you could run the attack. And this is why we looked at a linearization attack against the cipher, and we found out that you can guess the number of clocks for the first register correctly with a probability of 12%, and you can guess the clocking for all 3 registers together correctly with a probability of 0.2%, which seems to be low, but which is sufficient.
But not in a cryptographic context. Remember, we're usually talking about trillions of things, so being able to guess something with 0.2% is huge.
And if you have access to 500,000 different key streams produced with the same key, you can reveal the secret key of the cipher within 1 day on a standard PC with a fast graphics card. And if you have access to